Well, good evening and welcome to this episode of the Philosophy of Information, where we will try to see events of our time with a more philosophical perspective. My name is Andre Maloche, and I would like to welcome our guest tonight, Dr. Oliver Heydorn, who's a philosopher, a writer, and a specialist of the C.H. Douglas social credit doctrine. Dr. Heydorn, you were supposed to be in Australia. I was thinking, I said, he will bring some heat. It will be more warm, but he's not. He's in Ontario. So I wanted to say good morning, but instead I will say good evening. How are you today or tonight?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And how are you?
I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine,
Good.
except it is minus 21. So let's try to warm up the atmosphere here and try to understand more about this doctrine. Oliver, we met. We know each other since August. Because I was invited to meet Dr. E. Michael Jones for the annual conference on social credit at the Pilgrims of St. Michael in Rougemont, Quebec. And this is where I met you. And I was pleased to meet you first, to meet Michael Jones, but also a lot of people at the Pilgrims of St. Michael. So I am very happy to have you tonight so we can discuss about maybe something that is quite interesting. I've just finished your book entitled Social Credit Economic. And I have to say, first of all, it's a very, very long book, 500 pages with a lot of notes, footnotes, and a very complex book about, I would say, macroeconomy, but a system that most people don't know. I would say the general public, they really don't know who is Clifford Hugh Douglas. So it's quite interesting to have this discussion. And I would like to ask you a first question about the doctrine of C.H. Douglas. It was created 100 years ago, and in your book you describe it very well. You describe all the structure, the monopoly of banks over the entire economy. So, how come this concept is not more known by the general public? And how you could explain that after 100 year, I think it was 2017, 2018 that you celebrated the 100 years, something like that, I saw.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
how come, I didn't know about this system. So how
Mm.
come we don't know more about this doctrine, if I can use the expression?
Well, I think the short answer to that is that the financial system and the financial powers, they are the single greatest power in our contemporary civilization because virtually everything depends on money. It depends on access to credit. As Douglas himself said, the control of credit is the control of policy. So I think we are blind to it, or we've become blind to it, because the money power obviously isn't going to investigate itself. And it's also the case that all the institutions that form public opinion, let's say the media, the entertainment industry, the let's say political parties, politicians, the educational system, all of these things directly and indirectly are dependent on money and therefore dependent on the financial system. So because of that dependency, it's not going to be easy for them either to throw a light on how the financial system works, whom it benefits, who it hurts. And I think that is the essential reason why most people carry on without any knowledge whatsoever concerning banking or the financial system or the many ways that this affects society, the economy, politics, the environment, international relations, even. So it's a very self-protecting system that we live under. And Douglas will talk about it a little later on. There were times in the past when Douglas and social credit were much better known than they've become.
Exactly. We will talk about it
Talk about
later.
that.
Yes, it's very
Yeah,
interesting.
but I should perhaps mention, even at this early stage, just for the clarity of viewers, that when we talk about Douglas social credit, we're not talking about the CCP social credit system that they have in China, right?
The
So
Chinese Communist Party, yes,
the Chinese
that's a
Communist
good
Party. So Douglas social credit goes back 100 years. It started basically in 1917 with the very first article that Douglas wrote. And it was a movement that reached its heyday in the interwar period, I'd say. It's 20s and 30s. But it's got nothing to do whatsoever with this Chinese social credit system, which originated maybe around 2014, or that's when it was called that.
Yes.
And the only thing they have in common is the name social credit. And in fact, you could even say that the CCP system is the opposite of Douglas social credit. It's an inversion of Douglas's ideas. So not only is it not the same, but it's the exact opposite, because Douglas's whole idea was that you need to empower the common citizen to monitor and to reward or punish those people who hold power in a society, whether it's politicians, bureaucrats, business people, etc. The CCP system has turned this on its head to the point where it's the government, the state authorities who are monitoring the citizens and rewarding or punishing the citizens depending on how they behave, whether they behave in line with the CCP party policy.
Mhm.
So it's a complete inversion, and they've got nothing in common.
So, because it's a system of control, which is not the system of Douglas. There's when I was reading your book, first of all, it was extremely interesting in a sense that you explained very well what is macroeconomy, how it works, the monopoly of credit, and how it creates scarcity. And there was always a quote that was coming back in your book. The true purpose of economic association is twofold: to deliver the goods and services which individuals desire, and B, to do this with the least amount of trouble to anyone. So, can you summarize in one sentence, or maybe this is the phrase, trying to fulfill the needs and the desire of individual, and to do it with the least amount of trouble? We're very rich. We have a lot of wealth, but everybody lives under scarcity. This comes back often in your book. How could you explain that it is not known today? People are running mortgage. They want to they're afraid to lose their work. So how can you explain this? And what could summarize the I know it's very difficult when you write a book of 500 pages, you cannot summarize in one. But is it possible for ordinary people to understand the differences?
Yeah, so it's not an easy thing to summarize something as involved and complex as Douglas social credit in one sentence. But I would say that the basic idea is that if we want the economy to function properly, if we want it to fulfill its purpose well, then the financial system has to be designed to reflect real economic facts. It's the physical reality of what we can produce and what people actually need and want. So Douglas's point was simple but profound, and that is that we've got the physical economy, we've got farms, factories, technology, labor, resources, and all of these things can, in physical terms, easily produce an abundance. And we can produce that abundance without relying on full employment. Right? We don't actually need everybody working in order to satisfy the needs of the population. But on the other hand of the equation, you've got the financial system, which is supposed to serve just as an accounting tool for that real productive capacity, but the accounting as it's currently set up under the existing system, the accounting doesn't match the reality. It doesn't map on to the reality. It limits, the picture that it paints, it limits our productive potential, and it misdirects and distorts our economic activity. So you end up with poverty in the midst of plenty, with servility in place of freedom, with periodic financial crises, constant inflation, ever-increasing debt, high taxation, economic waste and sabotage, mass migration, environmental damage, international conflict, and so on and so on. So the basic message is we don't suffer because we can't produce enough. We can produce more than enough. We suffer because the financial rules that we are operating under, they don't line up with the reality. They don't line up with what we're actually capable of producing. So Douglas's idea is fix the money system so that it accurately reflects reality. And then the rest of the economy can finally do what it's meant to do, which is, to tie it in with the quote that you cited there, deliver the goods and services that individuals desire and what they need to survive and flourish with the least amount of labor and resource consumption. Right? Economics is supposed to be about efficiency. Well, in physical terms, efficiency would be getting what we need with the least amount of input, least amount of effort, least amount of resources. And our current economy, because of the way the financial system is set up, it is anything but efficient.
And in your book, you make a difference between, if I remember, the financial credit and the real credit. How, the system creates scarcity. So people will always struggle to attain their desire or the goods that they need. I have another quote that I found very interesting, because it shows, you show in your book, you describe very well the system of Douglas, and you shows that the economic functionalism is neither a form of capitalism nor a form of socialism. I forgot to mention the concept of social credit is also associated with the economic democracy. I think you will describe later. How can you explain the difference? Because what I was saying was the two systems, they concentrate the power in the hands of a few. I think in your book you mentioned the capitalist system that concentrate the wealth or the decision in the hands of a few, and we would say, oh, the socialist system, it is not true. But you still have an elite, and you still have a party, and they still control the economy. So the system of Douglas, it's completely different from those two systems.
Yes. So, when you talk about capitalism and socialism, these terms are very difficult terms, very dangerous terms in a way, because they can mean so many different things to different people. So I'll try to be as straightforward and as clear as possible. If by capitalism you mean an economy that's capital intensive, let's say, rather than labor intensive, then the social credit economic system could be described as a type of capitalism. If by capitalism you mean free enterprise, private property, the profit motive, the market mechanism, Douglas social credit is likewise capitalist in that sense. If, however, which I think is really the correct definition for capitalism, if by capitalism you mean a society in which the number of people who actually own productive property, productive assets, is actually quite small. So only a few people are owners, and the rest of the population can only survive by selling the one thing that they have, which is their labor. then I would say that the Douglas social credit system is not capitalist in that sense. I mean, that automatically runs in the direction of the concentration of power that you were talking about. Only a few own productive property. Douglas social credit maintains that in order for the economy to work well, in order for it to fulfill its purpose well, every person should enjoy a minimum beneficial ownership in private productive capital, and that this can be achieved through monetary reform. There's no confiscation or redistribution that's actually necessary to achieve that. Now, when it comes to socialism, it should also be clear that this also can mean different things to different people. In spite of the word social in social credit, we in the social credit movement have always liked to clearly disassociate ourselves from socialism. We could say that as far as conventional socialism is concerned, what most people think of as socialism, Douglas social credit is not only not socialist, it's anti-socialist. So if socialism means state ownership of the means of production, or the nationalization of industries, if it means a command economy, central planning, a welfare state, if it means heavy taxation, excessive regulation, bureaucracy, we are not in favor of any of those things. And I could say, I mean, it's such a delicate thing in how you explain this to people. But I could even say that while Douglas social credit is not a species of libertarianism, I think it's the only practical, feasible way of actually delivering what most libertarians want, or what all libertarians want really, which is smaller government, less powerful government, lower taxes, less interference in economic life. So the idea there being that if the public authority would not shirk its responsibility, if it would actually regulate appropriately, in line with reality and natural law, the financial system, so that it works well for everybody, then a lot of the government programs and government interferences in the economy would no longer be necessary. Right? So if you regulate the regulator of economic activity appropriately, which is money, and the financial system is able to reflect reality accurately, then it should be a lot more functional. And if it's more functional, then you don't need the state or the government to come in and mop things up constantly, right? And try to make a bad system work, which is what we've got at present. So we would say the existing financial system, which is a private system, which benefits a private monopoly and concentrates wealth and power in their hands, at one and the same time actually provides a pretext for big government and for high taxation. So there you've got the two poles again, where you've got concentration of power in the public sector and concentration of power in the private sector. And most people, of course, are disenfranchised, right? The 90% or the bottom 99%, however you want to look at it.
Yes, 99, exactly.
So if we think of the conventional economic spectrum with, let's say, Marxist socialism on the extreme left end and laissez-faire capitalism on the right, I would say that, strictly speaking, Douglas social credit is not either of those things. It's not on either extreme, but it's not found anywhere in between either. It's not a mix of those two things, right? Because both of those tend to monopoly, private or public monopoly. So it's something that lies beyond the conventional spectrum entirely. We say yes to private productive property in general. I mean, we do admit that there might be some, there are things like national defense where there's market failure and it makes sense for the state and the government to provide those things. But otherwise, if it can be provided by the private sector, it probably should be. And so we say yes to private productive property, but we recognize that it needs to be more widely and more equitably distributed, so that we're all owners, we're all shareholders to at least a bare minimum extent. And on that basis, the economy would actually function a lot better than it does. It would be more stable, and it would allow people to flourish, which is its purpose, its goal.
It's interesting because you're mentioning two things. The first thing is the word labor.
Mm.
What struck me, for example, in the book of Michael Jones, Baron Metal, the conflict between labor and usury, very, very interesting book. And that book brought me to your book. The second thing is what I've noticed in social credit economic in your book was deflation or inflation, how they can control, how the monopoly can control the scarcity or control or force people to consume what they don't want. I remember it came back often in your book. You produce some goods on the territory, and if there's too much good, the price will drop because there's not enough demand. So you force people to consume what they don't want. That's what I've noticed. Uh, Considering what we know now, the actual debt in Canada, and I will not talk about the US, but just Canada, $1.3 trillion, and all provinces are under debt. I think the amount of interest on the debt this year will be close to $75 billion. How can we change this system today and to promote the doctrine of C.H. Douglas, to explain that the right association? This comes back often in your book. The right an association has to be productive for everybody, not just a few. So my question is, how can we change it, and how long it would take to implement the economic democracy, considering what we know now? It's especially after more than 100 years that this system is known. You are a social creditor, and you have an international community who knows about it. How can we help promote and maybe change the actual system?
Well, I would say that some people, when they're introduced to Douglas social credit, it seems like pie in the sky. It seems utopian or unrealistic or what have you. But I would say, with everything that's going on in the world, not only is change possible, change in this direction possible, but I think it will be necessary, because the existing financial system is not sustainable. It's not financially sustainable, right? We've got periodic financial crises where, let's say, the debt burden gets to be too great. And it's not economically sustainable, especially now with AI and automation. We cannot meaningfully maintain a policy of full employment. We would say that's already the case, and has been for a number of decades already, that many jobs are useless, witless, redundant, and or destructive, and they simply exist in order to distribute income to people who would otherwise be without an income. I mentioned before that the present system, it's not environmentally sustainable, it's not politically sustainable. And so I think that the physical facts of the situation, combined with tech development and the dysfunctionality, the dishonesty and the dysfunctionality of the reigning financial system, all these things are going to force a crisis. And if we know what to do and how to do it, we can put forward a Douglas social credit type system to resolve that crisis. I think we have to move in that direction. I don't see any other solution, really. How long would it take? Well, I think once you have the political will present, I think such a system could be phased in over a number of years, a certain period of time. I should mention that Douglas social credit is not a revolutionary doctrine. We're not talking about ripping the carpet up from the existing society. Rather, we want to organically evolve in a more constructive direction. So the change would have to be done carefully. It would have to be done gradually. But I think as long as you've, or rather I should say, in order to arrive at the political will, which we're quite far from that, I think the prerequisite is that we need education. The mass education of the populace is really the single most important factor. Douglas said he was of the opinion that no power can stand up against public opinion. And if that public opinion is correctly informed, if it's reliably informed about economic and financial matters, the awareness of the population would have to force a change in a Douglas social credit direction. So I think that from our point of view in the Douglas social credit movement, the immediate necessity is to expose as many people as possible to these types of ideas. And I think, I won't put words in your mouth, but I think many people would say that when they come across it for the first time and they really dig deeply into it and grapple with it, there's a bit of wrestling involved. You can't really look at the world the same way.
For me, it was a marathon.
It was a marathon.
A good marathon, but
Yes.
I finished. I went to the finish line. Continue. Sorry.
Yes. So I think once you understand what Douglas was saying, you can't look at the world the same way. Everything has changed, and you can see how irrational and how ridiculous, how unjust and how inefficient, and quite frankly stupid the existing system is. But it's tolerated because it empowers certain vested interests, and they profit off of the existing dysfunction.
Yes, it is. I think we are indoctrinated. And yes, you're right. For me, it took time to organize this interview with you, because I told myself I just don't want to have a friendly discussion. Of course, it is a friendly discussion, but I want to go deep. And the book is 500 pages long. And I can guarantee you, sometimes I was struggling, because you go deeply in macroeconomy and explaining the system, either the capitalist system or the socialist system. And slowly, I remember I wrote you an email and I said, shit, the first part is not possible. And you said, and after that, you said, wait. The third part will become more clear. And it is true. And when you read this, you cannot see economy the same way. I had the same reaction when I read the book of Michael Jones, Baron Metal. It was like something that was a veil that was lifted in front of my eyes. I felt this for many years, but I could not put words on it. And I didn't know the concept of social credit. We in Canada, the only thing I knew was two type of expression: the social credit of Réal Cahouette in the federal government, who was the social credit or Crédit Social, the party, and Camille Sanson in Quebec. That's the only thing. And for me, it was like, I don't know this. And maybe in another interview, we will talk maybe between the link between social credit and Catholicism. But could you explain or describe what happened in 1917 and 1920 and 1925 in Alberta, for example? I did some little bit of research about what happened in Alberta. There was a party that was elected. Nobody knows about this history, or very few people, including me. So could you outline main feature of and key events for to explain what happened in Canada?
Yeah, so social credit, Douglas.
And who is Douglas?
Yes, all right, we'll start there. So C.H. Douglas, Clifford Hugh Douglas, was born in 1879, and he died in 1952. He was a British engineer, a mechanical engineer, and he was quite successful as an engineer. He worked all over the world. He worked in Quebec, actually, at one stage. And he, I think it was around the age of 40 or so, after a series of serendipitous events, he got very interested in the whole question of money and finance and the financial system. This is during the First World War. And he was tasked by the British government to examine an accounting muddle that the Royal Aircraft factory in Farnborough in England had got itself into. And as he was going through the books, he realized that the factory was generating costs and prices faster than it was distributing incomes in the same period of time. And he thought, well, if that's true, what are the implications for the wider economy? So he looked at the books of 100 other British firms, and unless they were headed for bankruptcy, each firm was generating costs and prices faster than it was distributing incomes. So one of the core claims of Douglas social credit is that the economy under the existing financial system is inherently unbalanced, right? People tend to assume that for every dollar that's coming forward in price, that's covering cost and enough to make a profit, that there's automatically a dollar of income in someone's pocket, and that the two
And it
sides,
is not true. It is
and it's
not
not the
true at
case.
all.
No, it's not the case. There's no automatic balance. So there's an underlying recurring deficiency of consumer buying power, and the economy, because of the nature of the financial system, the economy is lacking homeostasis. It's not in balance. And as a result of this, we are forever trying to reestablish balance. And the main way of doing that is to rely on somebody to spend more than they earn and borrow the difference, very often from the banking system. So if you look at consumers spend more than they earn and they borrow the difference, right? And the government, if it's running a deficit, it spends more than it earns and it borrows the difference. And even private companies sometimes, if they're in an investment phase, they will spend more than they earn and borrow the difference. And on Douglas's analysis, this is not people, being greedy necessarily or not wanting to live within their means. It's actually a structural, functional necessity of the economy. It's how we fill the gap, right? We don't have automatically enough income to buy back in full what we produce. In order to get additional purchasing power, someone has to go into debt. So that's, and Douglas says, well, this is unjust, and it creates all sorts of problems, because then you have ever increasing debt and all the interest that's charged on that debt. He suggested we could actually just we should fill it with debt-free credit and distribute it to everybody as a discount and a dividend. We might talk a bit more about that later, but so Douglas wrote his first article on what's now known as social credit in 1917 in a book called The Organizer. And then he wrote several books. Economic Democracy was his first book in 1920, followed by Credit, Power, and Democracy in, I think, 1922. And then there was a book in 1924 called Social Credit, and that is, I think, the first time that that particular term was fully embraced by Douglas himself as the name of his doctrine. And social credit has a very long and significant history in Canada. Canada was one of the first countries where Douglas's ideas were taken seriously. So in 1923, for example, Douglas was invited to present evidence before the Canadian Banking Inquiry in Ottawa. And the trip was arranged by the Southam family, which they were the owners of the Ottawa Citizen, and they were very interested in Douglas's analysis of the financial system. And so, from the 1920s onward, there were Douglas social credit study groups, journals, newspapers across the whole country promoting Douglas's ideas. And so there was always this strong undercurrent of social credit thought in Canada. Now, where the movement really broke through was during the Great Depression, because economic conditions
1929. Yes, okay.
Yes, economic conditions were so severe that people were looking for answers, and they were open to new ways of thinking. So around 1935, William Aberhart, otherwise known as Bible Bill, he was a Protestant preacher. He formed the Social Credit political party in Alberta. And in 1935, to everyone's great surprise, it swept into power with a large majority.
He was elected, and he had a majority.
He became premier, and it was the world's first social credit government. Now, unfortunately, every attempt that the Alberta government made to implement social credit or some aspect of it was blocked. It was blocked by higher authorities. So the courts, vetoed measures. The Lieutenant Governor General withheld assent. The federal government intervened. The Privy Council said, no, you can't do that. And
interesting.
Yes. And so the argument basically was that, Alberta is just a province under the terms of the British North America Act. It doesn't have jurisdiction over banking and finance, and so it's out of order. It can't do these things. So so they tried. They tried multiple times, and they just could not introduce monetary reform. In spite of that, the Alberta Social Credit Party held on to power for 36 years. And that shows you how deep public support was in that province for the general idea, even if the reforms were thwarted. Now, in British Columbia, there was a social credit party that was established there as well in the 1950s, and they were elected, to everyone's surprise. They, of course, were not in a position to introduce monetary reform otherwise, but for many, many decades, they held power in that province up until the 90s, actually. And so they did their best to provide the province with good government. I think it's probably fair to say that in both cases, in Alberta and British Columbia, the Social Credit Party, because they were unable to introduce monetary reform, they kind of morphed into a center-right
policy or
party. So there was also a federal social credit party. And so few people know this. After the 1962 election, there were 30 social credit MPs in the Canadian federal parliament and actually held the balance of power.
Was it with Real Cowet at the time? Or it was before?
I think Real Cowet might have been after that period.
Okay.
Check.
Yes, but, maybe 1966, 1967.
Yes.
Yeah, you're right.
So, but since you brought Real Cowet up, in Quebec, social credit was extremely strong. So you have the two provinces in Canada that, have the reputation for being at odds with each other, right? One Protestant, one Catholic, but they were quite united when it came to Douglas social credit.
Exactly.
And the need for monetary reform. So we may, in social credit, we may have found the solution to Canadian unity. You had the ralliement créditiste, I think is what it was.
Yes, ralliement créditiste, yes.
And there was also the Union of Electors, and these were the Pilgrims of St. Michael, which we'll probably talk about.
We will talk about it later. Yes, of course.
Yeah. So, it was a very significant force in Canadian politics. But I think if you were to ask the average person today, I don't know, maybe under 70, if they know about social credit, they probably don't recognize the term, know nothing about the history, or they would confuse it with the much more recent and opposite CCP social credit system. They don't talk about Douglas social credit on the CBC. It's been sent down the Orwellian memory hole. Nobody knows anything about it, and it's not to be discussed. There is one thing that I should mention before we proceed any further, just to clarify, and this is kind of interesting. Douglas himself was not in favor of establishing a political party for the purpose of
I wanted to ask you this question. Credit. Why?
Okay. So Douglas was not only a monetary theorist and an economic theorist, he also had an elaborate political theory and proposals for political reform. And on Douglas's view, establishing a political party for the purpose of introducing social credit was the wrong move for a number of reasons. So first, he would say that social credit is not a partisan doctrine, right? It's a common interest reform. In other words, any party let's say it this way, any party could support social credit as a monetary reform system. And ideally, all of the political parties should support it, because what matters here is the common interest of the citizen, right? It's it's the having of a financial system that actually reflects reality, that's structurally honest and works in the common interest. So it's not something that is of the left or of the right or the conventional center. It's something that is in the interest of every single citizen, no matter who they are. And if you turn it into a party, you sort of automatically narrow the appeal, and it makes it look like it's a partisan movement when it's not. And he also thought the moment you label a party social credit, you automatically compel the other parties to be anti-social credit. They've got to distinguish.
Yes, the opposition.
That's right. By default, now they have to be anti-social credit. So you create a divide and conquer dynamic where social credit becomes something for some people to fight rather than something for everybody to study. And so Douglas thought the party label would close the minds of people to it who otherwise might be open to understanding its principles. And I suppose the last reason that we could cite, there are a few more, but the last reason we could cite that, why was he opposed to the establishment of a political party, was he thought that implementing social credit is actually a responsibility of the experts, right? It's the responsibility of the civil service, the treasury, the banking administrators. It's not the responsibility of a political party. So if you create a social credit party composed of politicians, composed of amateurs, he thought that any failure of the experts to deliver would be laid on the shoulders of the amateurs, right? And he said, well, most people, not there are exceptions, but most people who are politicians, they don't have the technical capacity to be implementing such a system, and so therefore they shouldn't be shouldered with the responsibility. Their task is to communicate the policy preferences of the citizens, to say the citizens want a financial system that's honest, that's functional, that's efficient. The present system is failing us. Give us a system that will work better. And that's for the experts in banking and money and accounting to actually design the nitty-gritty of the system that will meet that particular policy objective. So those were some reasons why he thought that no, social credit should be a broad movement, a nonpartisan movement. And we need everybody. It's for everybody. It's in everybody's interest. So everybody should be involved, and there's no discrimination. Let's say it's something that everyone should be able to get behind, and we will need to get everyone behind it in order to actually get it, because that movement would challenge the most powerful vested interests in society. And so it's only by uniting that we'd ever have any chance of actually changing the system in favor of the common people, not by dividing the population into political parties. Now, for whatever reason, because human beings are human beings, I suppose, a lot of people did not, they thought social credit is great. Yes, we need monetary reform. We want a national dividend, compensated prices, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But they thought, oh, we know how to do it. We're going to form a political party, and that will get the job done. So,
okay, we will form a political party instead of forming a group of wise people that have studied macroeconomy and that would arrive and propose the strategy to change from the actual system to a system of social credit. And also the expression that I like a lot, economic democracy. You mentioned also the dividend and the free credit. You say you have this expression, free. People will say, what? I have free credit? Or it's like the other thing that I like a lot, full employment. In your book, you demonstrate clearly that today we are very rich. We can think about natural resource in Canada, and we have a lot of natural resource. It's a big country, even for 41 million people. So we have enough wealth to implement this system. and not everybody would be obliged to work because of the industrial world that we live in. So
Mhm.
it's this is a quite this it was not shocking for me, but most people will say, well, people will not work,
Mhm.
and everybody, it's like unemployment. It's like you don't work, you feel guilty.
Mhm.
How what's the how can you convince people? Because if you say to somebody you will have an income enough to fulfill your basic needs, or but if you want to work, you can work, but we should base work on competence, and not, like you mentioned, full employment of people who are just receiving an income.
Mhm.
uh, we hear often the expression UBI today, Universal Basic Income, and you demonstrate in your book that it is not a universal basic income. It is something that is much more complicated or complex. I will not say complicated, complex, because you mentioned the dividend and the free credit, and also how you balance the production and the consumption of goods and services. There's one thing that I've noticed, because you mentioned the political party in Alberta and in BC. Uh, Imagine today Daniel Smith would be able to lead Alberta to independence, a sovereign. Would they be capable of implementing a system? Would they, because you mentioned also the Privy Council, uh, would they have the power legally to implement this type of system, or they would face resistance everywhere, in your opinion? And how come those politicians don't have advisor who really know the
Mhm.
system? They don't want.
Mhm. I think in the Canadian situation, the only government at present that would have the power to introduce it would be the federal government. If Alberta were to become independent, or if Quebec were to become independent, then as long as they're truly independent, it's not, let's say, sovereignty association or something like that,
Exactly.
then they should legally be in a position where they could introduce monetary reform in the common interest. I had to. This is a bit of an aside, but I had to laugh the other day because I think it's the leader of the Parti Québécois in Quebec was saying that, well,
Pierre Saint-Paul Plamondon, yes.
yes, he said in an independent Quebec we would have our own money, which he means that Quebec would ditch the Canadian dollar and they would have, I don't know what they would call them,
I
piastres.
know it. No, it would be the Quebec pesos.
Okay, the Quebec pesos. So that sounds superficially very attractive, but there's no point in Quebec becoming independent, adopting its own currency, but then running the same system that we have
As
everywhere
exactly,
else in the world, right? Because
currency competing against each other,
yes,
and there's a question that is not in in the questionnaire, but anyway, I will ask. They abandoned the gold standard in 1972, and you mentioned in your book some people would like to go back to the gold standard. And when there was this seminar in Rougemont, Alain Pilote was explaining
hmm
what happened with the gold standard, and how it is a bad idea to go back to something that is also rare.
hmm
And I think people don't understand. I did not understand. I suspected it, but I could not put words on it, which you do very well. Can we go back to the gold standard? And if not, why?
um, our response in the social credit movement was that it would be that we can't go back to the gold standard because basically, if you do that, you're limiting the economy to a scarce and limited amount of a
Of
precious metal, right? So
exactly.
we need the money system to be sufficiently flexible that money can follow the physical realities and the physical demand, right? So if there is a need or a desire for some good or service and we have the resources to answer to that need, the raw material, the technology, the labor, etc., then the financial system should just be kind of a servant. It shouldn't put any artificial limitations on what we can physically do, right? What is one of the axioms in Douglas social credit is whatever is physically possible should be financially possible. And so when you have like a gold standard, you're basically limiting the amount of money that can be created. And that is going to have all sorts of effects, negative effects in terms of limiting production and also limiting our capacity to consume. So it puts money in the driver's seat rather than putting the real economy in the driver's seat. And so we do not think there's anything to be gained by going backwards in that way. I did want to talk briefly about the UBI because a lot of people know about universal basic income. And I want to make it clear that the Douglas social credit proposal for a national dividend, which would be a payment delinked from work that everyone would receive, it sounds superficially similar to UBI, but it's quite different. There are fundamental differences. One of them has to do with the fact that the funding is completely different, right? UBI promoters typically, there are exceptions, but typically they're talking about providing everyone with an income within the context of the existing financial system. So it's debt funded or redistributive taxation. And what we're saying is that actually there's a gap in the economy, which we currently fill with additional debt, whether it's government debt or consumer debt or business debt. And in lieu of all of that additional debt, we could have an organ of the state, call it a national credit authority, that could measure the gap and create sufficient credit free of any necessity for payment and distribute it to everybody in the form of a dividend. Now, so the funding is completely different. We don't have to we don't have to rob Peter to pay Paul. We don't have to increase the public debt. We just need honest accounting, basically. And when it comes to, if people get that, they won't work. One of the other differences between the national dividend and the UBI is that there's a feedback mechanism in place with the national dividend. It's actually indexed to productivity. It depends on the size of the gap. If too many people say we're not going to work, then nothing will be produced, or much less will be produced.
The dividend will go down.
And the dividend will be smaller, and it will become harder for people to live off of it. And that's an indication, actually, we need more work if we want to maintain the standard of living. So it's not a guaranteed amount. A lot of times the universal basic income is presented as a certain amount that will always be there regardless of what's going on economically. And we say, no, it's got to be built on reality. It's got to reflect reality. Do we have a surplus that can be distributed? No surplus, no dividend.
Exactly.
So it's so we have a mechanism in place to ensure that sort of thing doesn't happen. Clearly, because of the way society is and the way it's gone in the last 50 years in particular, if you had a social credit society, you would have to change people's mentalities. The educational system would have to be redesigned to prepare people for a life of leisure. And leisure in social credit doesn't mean idleness. It means having the freedom to decide for yourself how to profitably spend your time, right? So the culture would have to change, the educational system would have to change. But there have been times and places in human history where we didn't have full employment. For example, Merry England, right before the Reformation, 1500s, many historians, reputable historians, these people aren't social creditors or know nothing about social credit. They will tell you that the average peasant only had to work 15 weeks of the year.
I gave this example to one of my friends. He was completely shocked about it.
Yes.
Sorry, go on.
Yes. and they enjoyed 150 official holidays a year. So what did they do with their spare time? Well, they built the cathedrals, and they spent time with handicrafts, and developed the arts and the sciences, and so on and so forth. So we could have a renaissance. We could have a cultural renaissance if you free up all this time and energy, and people can devote themselves. There are many meaningful things to do outside of paid employment. And I would say that, unfortunately, I don't want to insult anyone, but a certain percentage of the population, although they enjoy paid employment, it's questionable how meaningful their jobs actually are, and do they get personal satisfaction from it, or is it clock in, clock out? This drudgery is something I have to do because otherwise I don't get an income, and I can't survive.
We can refer to the Maslow pyramid, the pyramid of needs. And at the top, you fulfill yourself, you flourish. We think about art, or we think about knowledge or wisdom. You have your basic needs, and then you have social recognition. And the more you go up, the more you start to fulfill yourself, and people would have time to develop those higher, I would say, those higher desire or requirements. And yes, in your book, it's very well explained that UBI it's like you put a plaster on a system that fundamentally does not work. And you mentioned something important: money would not be the master; money would be the servant. Because
Right.
you mentioned always the monopoly of credit, which force people to live under credit all the time. There's one thing, what the doctrine of social credit and economic democracy. How do you relate this to natural law or God's law?
Very good. Very, very good question. Lately, this has been one of my favorite things to think about and to talk about. So, why? Because I think the concept of natural law has been lost in our contemporary society. People don't seem to know what it is, but the basic idea of it is that reality, as we know it, is overlaid, or it's undergirded, however you want to put it, by laws. Right? There are certain principles where, if you arrange things in a certain way, you get a good outcome. If you arrange the same things in a way that violates the governing principles, you get a bad outcome. So one very simple, I suppose, example of natural law in action would be air travel. Right? And this is something which we've only been able to do since the beginning of the 20th century. We can travel from North America to Europe in a few hours. That's astonishing. That's almost like magic. We take it for granted. But what makes that possible? The only way that that's possible is that we've discerned the natural law as it relates to flight. So you've got the principles of aerodynamics, and according to those principles, when you arrange the components of a plane in a certain way, in the right way, in line with those principles, you get a flying machine that successfully and easily, efficiently can transport people from one continent to another. You can't say, I don't care what the principles of aerodynamics are. I'm going to design the plane the way I think it should be designed, right? According to, I don't know, some arbitrary set of principles, or some set of principles that cater to your ego, or to your utopian ideas concerning how the world should be, how it should operate. That's not going to work. We have to discern what the natural law is. It's something objective, and we have to work with it. In a sense, we have to obey it if we want to get constructive, positive results. So this idea of the natural law, it actually goes back to Zoroaster, Zarathustra.
Yes, Zarathustra.
That's right. The prophet Zoroaster, he referred to natural law as asha, right? And it's something that governs all our activities, all human endeavors.
All of us.
All of us. No matter what you want to do, if you want what you're doing to be successful, to flourish, you've got to figure out, okay, what are the principles that govern this activity? And of course, the idea of asha became the logos in Greek philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And it was taken up by Christian philosophers and theologians. So it's a fundamental part of our Western heritage, of Western civilization. And if we want the economy to flourish, if we want it to fulfill its purpose well, and if we want the financial system to work well, we have to discover what the natural law requires of both the financial system and the economy. How should the financial system be designed in keeping with the natural law so that it actually works well and gives us the result that is physically possible? Right now, the financial system, to a certain significant extent, it violates natural law. And the result of that is dysfunction and instability and a failure that is completely avoidable. In principle, it doesn't have to be this way. So in a nutshell, what is Douglas social credit all about? It's an application of the natural law to the financial system. We're seeking to apply the natural law to the financial system so that it will work efficiently with a minimum of friction, that it will do its job well. And
that's what I like. And in one of the phrase that always coming back, with the least problem to everyone. I think this is very important.
Yes, well, I think that's one of the marks of the natural law. You know that you're acting in keeping with natural law when things are harmonious, when things are, you're getting what you set out to get with a minimum of friction. You see, the more friction we have, the more conflict. This is another reason why Douglas didn't like political parties.
That's a very good point.
It's sort of wasted energy. It's dissipated energy, entropy. And so when you have that, when you see that in an institution or in societal systems or even in the family, you can say, well, we're doing something wrong. We're not aware of what the natural law requires, and we're not living in conformity with it.
But we continue, for example, to borrow money that we don't have, or the money that is created by bank, and we continue to increase the debt. So there's no exit. There's no issue. We just cannot get out of this trap. In your book, there's another quote about the lack of understanding. I think you just summarized it very well. The idea, and I will quote you in your book. You write, there is first of all the difficult task of informing the general population of social credit theory, so that each person may arrive at a level of understanding according to his capacity. Since informed public opinion is really the greatest political power that exists, you mentioned it earlier, it is imperative that people everywhere be properly instructed regarding the facts of political economy. The greatest weapon in the arsenal of the credit monopolist is the ignorance of the general population. You summarize it very well. And can we, you see, today we have a discussion, we have a debate, or you try to explain with, I would say, simple concept, what is this system, to show the difference that has nothing to do with the social credit of the Chinese Communist Party, where it comes from. Can we expect the general public to understand the state of servitude in which they find themselves, the debt, the credit,
right,
and how we can empower people? Most people, they are, overwhelmed by debt. The country is overwhelmed by debt, and the actual government, whether they are federal or provincial, they just keep on piling debts without any accountability. Do you think the general public can open their eye to see what is happening, and after that,
Yeah.
to say maybe the social credit could be a good system. How do we? I think maybe you answer the question, but
Yeah, I think that most people, they may not be interested in sort of all the nitty-gritty details, but I think most people can understand what the problem is in the broadest of terms, and also understand where the solution must lie, and what it must involve. I think if we look at our everyday experience, we can see where technology is at. We can see how fast technology is advancing, and how technology is displacing labor, has been displacing labor, and with automation and AI, it threatens to displace labor like never before
a lot, yes.
in human history. This is sort of unprecedented, the kind and the degree of technological labor displacement that we are facing. But when you look at all of the technology we have and what it can do, what conclusions can we reasonably draw from that? I think it should be obvious to everybody that economic life should be easier today than at any time in human history, right? It should be easier to have a roof over your head, to have clothing, to feed yourself, etc. Because machinery, technology makes production that much easier, with less and less
Easier,
input.
faster,
But better, all of those things. Well, not always better, but
not always better. That's a good
depends what we're talking
observation.
about. But generally speaking, technology has been a boon in terms of the rate of production, what we can produce, and how long it takes, and what's involved in it. And so, if the financial system actually reflected reality, if it reflected the physical reality, then it should also be financially easier to live now than at any time in human history. And yet it's actually the opposite.
The opposite.
It's the opposite. So the financial system we have, not only does it not reflect reality, it actually inverts reality. Because of the way it's designed, it reads physical economic progress, this tremendous abundance, as if it were a curse. And now because what it does is, in financial terms, it increases the gap, which means then, because you're increasing the capital component of production, and the gap is caused mainly by capital charges, so you increase the gap. Labor is even further removed, has less income relative to the full cost of goods and services, which then necessitates more debt. And so it's becoming harder and harder to exist financially, which is the opposite of what we should see if the financial system actually reflected the physical reality. So, households today, most households need two people working, two incomes. People are burdened by debt. We're far more burdened by debt now than people were, let's say, 50 years ago. Many families are one paycheck away from a crisis. Housing is
the fear always under the fear of losing the job, or being socially excluded.
That's right. So there's a contradiction between what we can do physically and what the financial system allows us to do, and that only really makes sense on the Douglas analysis. I don't know how you explain that contradiction unless Douglas's analysis is actually correct.
It is interesting because you say, how can they explain that? This week I was in the space on X. There was an economist who was talking about Joseph Schumpeter, and I know a little bit about him, about the creative destruction, and he was talking about AI. He was talking about many innovation, that life will be much better. We just have to wait. We have to destroy the old system, the economic reset. And I wanted to say, yes, okay, it looks fine on paper. But when you will destroy the economic system, you will have an economic reset. You will discard millions of people behind Is this what we call progress? Comparing to what, because you have, they always in this system, you always have winners, but you have losers, and losers, they are left behind. Poor them. We will keep them on, we will keep them alive. They will just survive with you. We'll keep them alive. UBI, or we will propose made. It seems that what he was advocating for was the same system with AI. Like there's a progress, but the same system. People live under fear. They are not secure. They can never flourish or meditate. We are animal that will die one day. We have to think about the past, the present, and the future. It's quite fascinating how some people they always answer the same answer toward the same question. You mentioned it in your book a couple of times. I found this very amusing, because you say every time we ask the question, your system does not work, whether it's socialism or capitalism, concentrating the wealth in the hands of a few. And in your book, you mentioned, you said, but they always repeat the same answer that does not answer the question, but it doesn't work. Your system does not work, and you double down. That's why I was finding this funny. And you mentioned full employment, and I think in your book you explained very well that because today we are wealthy, we would be able to produce all good and service with less people who would work. Actually, the world is based on privileges and rights, and the privileges of the elite are very well established, in a sense that they have a huge wealth, huge richness compared to the rest of the people. There was a philosopher not so long ago. He said, "I'm quite surprised to see that people want to dismantle churches and cathedral because they say they're useless, but they accept that Bill Gates has a $27 million house. They're not offended by the wealth of one individual compared to the beauty of a cathedral, for example, where it was open, free, where you can go and meditate and, first of all, see beautiful architecture." Do you think that climate change, all those disaster, pandemic, do you think that we will face a crisis in the civilization, and could that be an opportunity to implement social credit?
Yes, well, it's one of those curious things. You have a lot of people who are concerned with, let's say, environmental problems of one kind or another, whether it's, whether they're sincerely concerned or it somehow serves their own interest to appear to be concerned. But any genuine environmentalist who is concerned, let's say, about pollution, the using up of non-renewable resources, the destruction of habitat, they should be supporting monetary reform. They should be supporting Douglas social credit. Douglas social credit would be the greatest thing that they could do for the environment, because there's so much waste and economic sabotage. Full employment is one of aspect of it, but there's so much waste and sabotage
Exactly.
in the existing system because of the way the financial system operates, that I would say it's impossible to address any environmental problems appropriately from within the context of a financial and economic complex that directly and indirectly is causing so many environmental issues. So if environmental problems become so severe, then there is that opportunity to point out, well, you've looked at, I don't know, taxing the population. Let's say carbon taxes, for example. Carbon taxes uh, are just it's a power grab. It's a way of centralizing financial wealth and disenfranchising the population. It's not going to do anything at all. Um, I should point out. I hope I won't scandalize anybody. I don't believe in anthropogenic climate change myself. I don't think that that's actually going on. I do think we have
Mhm.
genuine environmental problems.
Those are
Um,
two different. Those are two different concepts. Exactly.
and the climate may very well be changing, but I don't think it's because we're burning fossil fuels. I don't think that's the fundamental factor. So I think carbon change is a bit of a sick joke that the elites, climate change, carbon taxes are a bit of a sick joke that the
Carbon tax,
elites
yes.
pay on us, because carbon, of course, is the basis of life. And so they're wanting to tax people for existing. But
Which is
yeah, yeah, but if you could make the economy much more efficient through monetary reform, then you could massively cut down on pollution. You could massively cut down on the use of
the waste. The waste.
the waste. You could protect habitats. It would also free up financial resources where we could actually engage more in environmental repair.
Mm.
That because whatever is physically possible should be financially possible. So if enough people in a country say that we've got a problem, let's say, I don't know, Lake Ontario is polluted, we need to clean it up, we would have the financial resources to do things that we can't do right now because we're all laboring individually and collectively under this stone of debt.
Mm-hmm.
You see? So I think anyone who's genuinely concerned with the ecology or the physical environment should support Douglas social credit. And if we leave the financial system in place, there's nothing you can do. You're just rearranging deck chairs in the Titanic. There's nothing you're
But
going to do that's going to have any effect because
it will end eventually, because you
mm,
tax people. When you will tax people 100% of
mhm,
their, they will own nothing and they will be happy. I'm not that sure that they will be happy.
mm,
It will not. One day, uh, there will be a tipping point.
right, right.
And do you think we're close to that tipping point, considering the amount of debt in the Western? I'm not even talking about Canada. I'm talking about the Western countries in general.
I think that society is facing multiple challenges on multiple levels, and it's a bit of a miracle to me that it still functions at all, actually. Maybe I don't know, maybe I'm pessimistic, or I assess things too negatively, but I
You're
think
you're
that
you're not
it's
the only one. Huh?
no, I think it's becoming more and more difficult, and surely there must come a point where it can't continue. There has to be a breaking point. And it seems as well that the nature of things is such that we tend to accelerate towards that point. The faster things, well, I should say, the faster friction develops, and the faster entropy develops, then you can see where we're headed. And at some point, the momentum is so great that there's not much that can be done. So part of what we're trying to do in the Douglas Social Credit Movement is to say, you've considered many different things, but have you looked at finance? Have you looked at the money system? Because that actually is the key to all of it. Everything is downstream from finance, so maybe people should look at it.
Well, that's a hard task. There's one thing, Oliver. I would like you to talk about the Pilgrims of Saint Michael. We met there.
Mhm.
First of all, I want to thank you. I was very happy to meet you and meet also all those kind people. I was shocked that we still had community like this that was not only spiritually engaged, but intellectually engaged. And I was very, very happy. My wife was very happy. How did you come? How did you come up with this? How did you discover this association between the C.H. Douglas economic democracy and the Pilgrims of Saint Michael?
Yes, so the Pilgrims of Saint Michael are a lay Catholic group that have been promoting Douglas social credit for decades, and they have some full-time members who dedicated their whole lives to promoting Douglas's ideas under the guidance of Louis Evans, who was their founder.
Exactly.
And it was actually through the efforts of the Pilgrims that I discovered social credit about 20 odd years ago. So sometimes they do mass mailings of the country with various leaflets. And I think it was around 2002, I received one of their flyers in the mailbox and I started to read it. And at the time I had quite a lot of debt, student debt. And it was shocking to me to discover that the money that had been lent to me by the bank so that I could go to school was not someone else's hard-earned savings. The bank was not acting as an intermediary, connecting, lenders and borrowers, but actually the money that they lent me, they created by expanding both sides of their balance sheet. So even today, a lot of people, when they think about money, they're thinking about physical things, notes and coins, but that is only a very small percentage of the money supply. And the bulk of the money supply exists in the form of intangible bank credit. It's numbers that used to be kept in account books and now it's kept in computers. Basically, that's 95% or more of the money supply. And it's created by private banks whenever they make a loan or a purchase. So, they were talking about this in this leaflet from the Pilgrims of St. Michael, and that was it was quite a shock. Because again, this is something that everyone should know. Everyone should know. We should be taught in school about the basics of the money system. It's part of the societal infrastructure. How is it that we don't know anything about it?
That's a very good question.
So I had this debt, and I thought, and they wanted a certain amount of interest on it after so many years. I can't remember how much interest, $8,000 or $10,000, and I thought, it seemed unjust to me because it didn't seem like they had done $10,000 worth of work.
Exactly.
On my behalf. So why am I paying them $10,000? So I paid off the student debt as quickly as I could to limit the amount of interest I had to pay. And of course, Douglas social credit goes much more deep into the question of the financial system and the mere question of usury.
Exactly, that's what I wanted to refer to. Continue, go.
Or economic rent taking and banking, but that was sort of the entry point for me. Yeah. So, I'm not. I'm not a. I'll have to drink some water.
Go ahead. Go ahead. The subject is for me. It is the subject is fascinating.
I'm not a member of the Pilgrims, but I'm a friend and a supporter of the movement, and I've been there many times. And sometimes they have weeks of study where people can go and learn about social credit. And you attended some of those sessions.
I was like, I fell off my chair. I was like, where am I? And I felt like I was at home.
Right. That's good.
Intellectually speaking and spiritually, I felt like I was at home. My wife was extremely happy. She said, that exists in Quebec? That was a shock. And that's why I'm very happy with this meeting and those conferences. And you are organizing an international conference with social creditor, I think.
Yeah, so in conjunction with the Pilgrims of St. Michael, we plan to have a conference in May in Rougemont, Quebec, where we will invite various academics to come and deliver papers It could be on Catholic social doctrine. It
Hmm.
could be on Douglas social credit, or it could be on the connection, the interface between the two.
This is
Why were the
important. Yes.
Pilgrims of St. Michael, why did they take an interest in Douglas social credit? They took an interest because the Catholic Church has a very elaborate, very developed social doctrine that goes back many, 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 many years. And there have been all these social encyclicals that have been written by various popes. And if you read the social encyclicals, whether you're Catholic or not Catholic, a lot of it makes a lot of sense. It's just sort of common sense that this is the way society should function. And it's Catholic social doctrine has always steered clear of, let's say, laissez-faire capitalism extremes and also the socialist end. So it realizes that those are two false dialectical answers, and that the correct solution is not to be found in the conventional spectrum that's presented to us. Right? We're given a menu, and all the choices basically are faulty choices. Isn't that interesting?
Well, one thing that I always found odd or absurd was Adam Smith. Uh, how does he put it? The invisible hand
Hmm.
of the market. This is what somebody has his hand in your pocket. The invisible, and you don't see the hand. The free market. The market will regulate itself. It's not true.
Mhm.
It's not true. So that's why maybe earlier I was asking you about natural law and God's law, and now I think you're linking the two between the Catholic religion, all those encyclic that were based on common sense and based on natural law or God's law, and an economic system. I was so happy to discover this because it is something that calms your anxiety. You arrive at a point you say it is possible. No, it is not socialism. No, it is not capitalism. And so in socialism, you have the word social. Man is a social animal. So you have this social aspect. Capital means wealth, means something that you create. You mentioned earlier the dividend. No dividend if you don't produce good enough for to fulfill the desire of people. I found this very, very interesting. And when I was at the Pilgrim of St. Michael, because I was going there to see Michael Jones, but I met Helen Camara, I met so many extraordinary people. I have it's a tricky question. Anyway, you know all the question. I send it to you, but Michael Jones, he always say, God has a mission for you. You think God had a mission or has a mission for you by putting those flyer of the Pilgrim of St. Michael, and then you start to interest yourself into social credit because it's been 15 years that you
20 years,
20 years that you study this system. So you will have this seminar in May. So you will have a lot of people from everywhere around the globe.
Yes, that's the intention, and I think when we were talking about Catholic social doctrine, the Church actually doesn't provide a blueprint about how the economy should work or exactly it should be formed, but there's certain basic principles, like the economic system should respect the dignity of the individual, and it should work in the common interest, not in the interest of a few only.
Of a few, yes.
And then there's also the principle of subsidiarity, the idea that power should be decentralized as much as possible. Let the individual do for himself what he can do. Let the family do for itself what it can do. It's only those things that are beyond the capacity of the lower levels that should be the concern, let's say, of a provincial government or a national government. We don't want people at the top of the hierarchy micromanaging everything. There's no need for that. So it is a very bottom-up type of idea. And then there's the principle. Go ahead.
No, it's interesting because you mentioned subsidiarity, localism, and the family. You will make Tim Knight happy because in El Cerberus, he always talk about the family, and you're right. Coming from the bottom,
Right.
human dignity. You mentioned labor,
Right.
the dignity of labor.
So, a lot of Catholics who were familiar with Catholic social doctrine thought that Douglas social credit fit Catholic social doctrine like a hand in glove, that it was, of
Hmm.
all the various proposals out there for monetary and economic reform, that this actually was, if you will, a godsend, to say to the lay people, well, here is a wonderful way of incarnating the church's teaching of making the word flesh. This is a way of applying all those principles in a very concrete way. And it wasn't only appealing to Catholics, as I mentioned before. The premier of Alberta, he was a Protestant, William Aberhart. So there were many different Christian denominations, and there were non-Christians as well who were interested in social credit. And that's one of the very remarkable things about the social credit doctrine and also the history of the movement. It attracted people from all ends of the political spectrum. It was a unifying thing. We don't want to perpetuate conflict. We want to resolve conflict. And to bring it in, tied in with the natural law again, if you can discern what the natural law is and apply it appropriately, then you get much better results. And when you get much better results, people are more satisfied and society is more stable.
I have maybe one last question. Is it possible today in a secular world, especially we know the state of Canada and especially in Quebec also, you saw what happened with the bill of law in Quebec where they want to forbid prayer in the streets. Is it possible in a secular world that has rejected all its religious and spiritual reference point to rediscover our faith in, I would say, omniscient God, I would say, in who would guide us in these troubled time? You mentioned the religion, but also the application of those natural law or God's law. Is it possible today, considering where we are?
Well, I think it is possible. If we don't do it on our own, I think God slash reality slash the universe are going to force the issue.
You're right.
Because while we are free to disregard the natural law, we are not free of the consequences of having disregarded the natural law. So, I think it says it's in the book of Deuteronomy, but many other religious traditions would say the same thing. We have the choice between the blessing and the curse. Right? The blessing being living life in keeping with natural law, and the curse being disregarding natural law and doing what we want to do in accord with some concept of how we think things ought to be. And that choice is ours. It's our responsibility. But if we make a mistake, or if we don't care, and we think we can do with reality whatever we want, reality will have the last word. And so, the smart thing to do is to seek reality out, to learn and to adapt as quickly as possible so that you don't have any nasty surprises.
You're right. Exactly. It's very interesting because reality is there. It will always come back. We can bend it, but I'm not sure we can break it. Oliver, in your book, you express your intellectual debt to one of the current pillars of the Pilgrim of St. Michael, Mr. Alain Pilote. So I wish that maybe one day we will be able to have a discussion with you and Mr. Pilote about the implication of the pilgrims, maybe the heritage of Louis Evans and Gilbert Côté-Mercier, because I was so surprised to discover this. It's goes back to 1950. I thought this was gone, and I was very happy because it permitted me to reconnect with not only the history of French Canadian, but the spiritual heritage that we have. So this was very interesting. For me, it was an event. And with my wife, it was an event. So I was very happy. We arrive at the end of the interview. Do you have a last message of hope for Canadian?
Well, I'm convinced, and I think most people who take the time, the effort to apply themselves are also convinced and will be convinced that the answers, the fundamental answers for a successful society, a successful financial, economic, political, and social order are found in the writings of C.H. Douglas. He was a genius. And, he hasn't been given his due. He's been ignored. He's been misunderstood. He's been unfairly criticized. But I think if people apply themselves and they take the time to really understand what he was saying, they'll, in the words of Ezra Pound, in one of his cantos, because C.H. Douglas is one of the primary people that influenced Ezra Pound. In the words of Ezra Pound, the light became so bright and so blinding in this layer of paradise that the mind of mortal man was bewildered. So it's C.H. Douglas was a godsend. I think that was Providence acting, and it's for us to pay attention, to learn, and to apply what he taught us. It's that simple.
And in the heritage is incredible. I'm eager to read all your other books. I would like to remind people that you wrote the Social Credit Economics, Life of Our Own, and the Economic of Social Credit and Catholic Social Teaching. You have any other books that you wrote? That's the three.
Yeah. So there are four. There's another book, Social Credit Philosophy, which looks.
Oh yes, I forgot. I'm sorry, I forgot to put it. But I think it's in the description of the interview. So those books are
available on Amazon.
Okay.
There's also a book that will be published very, very shortly. We're hoping that was written by Lorne Resnowski, who was he's passed on now, but he was the erstwhile leader of the Federal Social Credit Party of Canada in the 1970s. And he wrote a manuscript dealing with C.H. Douglas and his influence on the American poet Ezra Pound, like we were just talking about. And I have a chapter and an appendix in that book as well. So that's something that will be coming out shortly. But it's really a crime, especially considering how significant social credit was in Canada. It's really a crime that hardly anybody knows who C.H. Douglas was or what social credit was. It's astonishing, and I take it as a sign that the powers that be don't want people to know, and that's why it's not talked about.
Yes, you're right. You're right. You have also a website, the Douglas Credit Social Podcast. I watched it. Below in the ticker, you have the address, and you have the address for the viewers. You have the address in the description of the video. I've watched all the episodes.
Okay.
They are very interesting. It gives you a very good perspective because you go quite in the detail of all those systems. The dividends, the free credit, the financial credit, and the real credit. It's very well done. And you have also, if I can just click on the other one, this one I found very, very interesting. The Douglas Social Credit. The link is in the bottom. It's small capsule, and they are animated. And you explain in this some aspect of the or most of the I would say the concept of the social credit. So they're very good website. They're very funny. Those small clips they're animated, and it helps people understand all those concepts. Sometimes they're not that difficult, but if it's macroeconomy, like you mentioned, passive and active, financial credit, creation of money, monopoly of credit. I think those are small clips that are more easy for people who are not aware or who don't know the system of sorry. It's you speaking, and it's me who's having to take a glass of water now. Oliver, thanks a lot for this interview. You will be back next week.
I will. Yes.
You will be back next week in French.
En français.
En français. For our viewer, for our French viewer, pour nos spectateurs en français, we will do most probably the same interview. We will talk about, it will be the same question in French, and we will try to explain what we did today. Nous allons essayer de parcourir ensemble la doctrine de C.H. Douglas avec beaucoup de plaisir. J'espère que ça va être intéressant pour nos auditeurs. Alors, ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for watching this interview. Please feel free to share it so that the C.H. Douglas doctrine and Dr. Heydorn work can be understood as many people as possible. I think, Oliver, you always refer to this. It's quite important. And until the next episode of the Philosophy of Information, which will be next week with Dr. Heydorn, I wish you a wonderful evening. Too bad I cannot wish you a wonderful day because you're not in Australia, so you will have to stay in Ontario. And Oliver, it was a pleasure.
Yes, same here. Thank you very much.
And I will see you next week.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.